Real quick before I start the podcast, if you want to help out the podcast, please put it on pause. Text like 30 people a link to the show if they cut meat or if they're in the culinary world of any means. Try to spread the show. Try to grow the show. Help us out. And another way to do that is leave a comment and review us on iTunes. It really helps, pushes us up on the algorithm. Right now, if you type in the word meat, we are the number 2 result. I want to be number 1. Number 1, people. Come on now. It's not all on you. It's a joint effort. If you want to support us, and by us I mean me and the American team, please check out the GoFundMe link in the show notes. Or you could get one of these sweet swag hats that I'm wearing right now from Davidson's Butcher Supply. All right, time for the podcast. What up, meatheads? This is Travis, American Butcher, and this, well, my friends, this is the Meat Block Podcast. Man, I'm not a good podcaster at all. I make too many jokes. I leave in a lot of ums and pauses, and sometimes I drink a lot, then I record, and it turns out weird. Man, I don't. People are gonna find me out, and I'm gonna suffer. I'm just joking. I'm fucking great at this, and this episode is about Imposter Syndrome.
Good cutting enhances the quality of good meat. Poor cutting results in an inferior piece of meat, regardless of quality.
So, in all sincerity, though, besides being the world's best podcaster, I truly do suffer from imposter syndrome. And it's not like in a false, modest sense. And I used to be really confident, and some things happened in my career, and then mixed with my personality, that kind of just rattled me and just kind of like sowed the seeds of self-doubt, where I'd be, even last week when I was hanging out with all those butchers and everyone's talking about and using Latin names and talking about these cuts and just basic stuff, I'm just smiling and nodding, and I felt like I was certainly lost with the kitchen terminology. I did pick up, the corner hot and right behind you sharp. But I actually knew that before. I actually was seamless in that response, but when it comes down to like prepping techniques and like I know mise en place, and I know, how to set yourself up for success using lean manufacturing and different tools that I've gathered throughout my career. But if there was like cut this at that, like, or, mince or cut or whatever, I remember one time, first time I made a porchetta and actually seasoned it. I made plenty of porchettas before, but as a cut and wrap facility where we just either opened up seasonings or had something prepackaged, we didn't make anything in-house. And I was mincing, I think rosemary to go into the porchetta, and I was cutting it really thin. And I remember the butcher, I was working retail at the point, it's like, wow, you're really bad with a knife. And I got like, what? Fuck you, dude. Because I was slicing it like as you would, a butcher. Like, I never used a chef's knife before. People talk about like knife skills and all that. It's just motions I've never done before. I looked down and looked at how he was doing it and how I was doing it. And he was right. I was terrible with the task at hand. But then, like, does he view this as the tunnel vision of through the skill level I feel I have, and his judgment is solely going to be on this one task that I'm doing, or will he see past that in my greatness? But I am going to obsess that he won't. And then, well, if I can't even cut this rosemary correctly with a chef's knife, what else can I do? What if he tells people he can't even cut rosemary right? Oh, fuck. Ugh. Ugh. And there comes that good old friend of anxiety who just, it's like, hey, haven't seen you since junior high. How are you doing? Do you want to hang out? Sure. But a lot less crying this time. Being a product of, coming of age in the mid-90s, I started going to therapy when I was really young. Classic 80s kid, product of divorce. 1 week here, 1 week there, etc. Therapy. And the therapist told my mom, Beverly is my mom's name. Not too many kids nowadays named Beverly. But, it's usually hard to get kids to talk about their emotions. And Travis, it's like he doesn't shut up about his emotions. He's always talking about how he feels and how things affect him and all this stuff. So I guess you could say from a young age, I was emotional. I certainly wasn't in tune with them. I was more made aware of them. Then should have been no surprise when later in life I was diagnosed with manic depression or bipolar disorder or whatever the fuck they call it now. And yes, some days I feel manic and I talk like this and da-da-da-da. Then there's those days where I'm like, hi, this is Travis. Welcome to the Meat Block Podcast. And then go on from there. And Imposter Syndrome has that same thing where you could be flying so good in your career. And it takes one incident to just cut you down to size. So when people always ask me how long I've been in the industry, and I say I started cutting around this or this time, if you ever notice, I never give a real date. I never give a real time. Because in my head, it's that imposter syndrome that, like, what if this person doesn't think that's enough time? What if this person says, oh, this person doesn't know that much because he's only been in it for this amount of time? And same reason when I post something online, now my posts are things that, like, I meticulously go over because of the fear of being found out, of someone being like, oh, he didn't chime that right, or da-da-da-da. So what better way to get over that by entering myself into the largest butcher competition in the world and making the American team and, with the great cast of people on that team. And Danny, Paul, Brian, and Kevin, Cindy, and myself. And don't forget our manager, Tia. And then cutting in front of all these people with my severe criticisms that I have. But the difference is these people are incredibly nice and welcome new ideas. And it was like this instant band of brothers. And I'm sure there'll be critiques and stuff along the way because we want to be the best that we could possibly be. But in my career, and a lot of people do this when they face those criticisms, when they haven't had any for a long time, it's almost like you want to be offended. And then it keeps coming. And I'm going to talk about, before I talk about imposter syndrome, I'm going to talk about the Dunning-Kruger effect. And I see this a lot online, and it's essentially the opposite, where people with minimal skills go out there and are now the experts. They're now the ones teaching classes, or now they're the ones who want to teach classes, and you give them advice and they don't look past what you're saying. They just look at, there's only a criticism here, and they're not taking it in. And they'll do all the motions and all that, but like, or they'll be like, no, I'm right. And they'll double down. I think you see that a lot in politics. People who don't take the criticism and then still firmly believe that they are right. And I see that a lot in the meat industry, and I'll read in the comments where someone will post something and someone will give a tip or something, which never give unsolicited advice. It doesn't go anywhere. That's not what they're looking for when they do something like that. Then they get real defensive. Well, you didn't get what I was trying to do. Or that's how we do it here, so you must be doing it wrong. Or some other reason or excuse. Or just a flat out, shut up, bitch. You let the comments go on forever, eventually it'll turn homophobic, sexist, and racist. It's the thing I hate about the internet. If you want to have a real bummer of a day, just type in butcher videos and watch someone who's posted something on YouTube, and then read the comments. And if the person who posted is responding, and they most likely have the Dunning-Kruger effect, where they're engaging to the point of defending. It's like the best, basketball players don't tell you how good they are. They just do it, and when people want to talk shit, they're just like, whatever. They don't even pay attention to that. So how does that relate to this episode about the imposter syndrome? A few years ago, I was hoping open up and getting a USDA processing facility cut and wrap opened in Southern California, where I'd be the cut manager. And it was a big step in my career and a huge opportunity. And I just came from working at an amazing retail shop that was critically acclaimed, and in that, all the things that looked great on paper and all that, but I left for a reason. And this was the company I was going to work for was a farm, and they were currently getting their animals processed at another USDA processing facility. And we were building a cut and wrap. So the current place they were getting them processed at invited me to see how they get their shit processed, so I could take notes and, learn how they cut it for their customers and help streamline the process. Or make it, not streamline the process, make a smooth transition from the company I was working for, leaving this already established cut and wrap, and then me operating it on our own cut and wrap. And we met, in inland California at 7 a.m, and it was hot. I just remember it being so hot because it was in the summertime. And it was an unrefrigerated cut and wrap. And the owners of the company that I was working for were there. And one of them gave me a mesh style hat that had the company's name on it. And I put it on my head as if I was in the band Suicidal Tendencies. The bill, upright, it high up on my head to accentuate my baldness since I wasn't wearing a bandana. And it was a bad choice. Yeah, I look back and I'm like, I probably shouldn't have done that. Not necessarily because of the look, but because of what I'm about to tell you. I go in to meet with my boss, the current owner and operator of the cut and wrap facility that they're using. I stick my hand out, say, hi, my name. Turn your fucking hat around. I have customers who come in and out of here, and I don't want them thinking we have some fucking hood working here. Travis. And that was how the introductory between me and this gentleman went. He's like, oh, you're a big shot, used to manage that place in LA. I wouldn't feel comfortable repeating what he said after that, even if I was very clear that I was quoting somebody. It was incredibly offensive and inappropriate, derogatory, sexist, and homophobic, and mixed in with some racism. All of his anger for the boutique butcher shops opening up and people getting the praise for a craft he's been working at for his entire life. All that bitterness of seeing the world changing around him, and he's an old man that no one gives a shit about, cutting and whatnot, and him seeing these articles in the LA Times and Number One Butcher Shop and the Food Network and whatnot. He took out every frustration and manifested it towards me in that moment. I think. I don't know. But it was awful. After talking to his employees, they just told me that's how he was. But when I was trying to say, hi, my name's Travis, and he cut me off and said that, I noticed that my voice quivered afterwards, and I got stuttering and awkward, and I got full of anxiety, and I didn't know what the fuck was happening. I was like, oh man, I feel like I'm going to have a panic attack now. So I suit up my knives, or put on my knives, and I had 4 in the scabbard. First, next thing he tells me is I have too many knives. I said, how many do I need? And he said, well, you should know that, Mr. Big Shot. Thanks. I was using a oval fine cut steel. It was a little wider, but it wasn't a one of those thick F-dick ones. When it says, oh, you got one of those big F-dick ones, what are they, a paint stir? It looks like you're going to go stir some paint. Then he throws me a pig and says, all right, let's see what you got. I'm like, well, what's the cut sheet? And he's like, what, you don't know your company's cut sheet? And the boss is like, no, we haven't gone over that yet. Then we go over it, and he's like, all right, how would you cut it? And I'm like, well, I'm here to see how you would cut it, and et cetera. And everything I did was met with feedback. I was also in his house, but that was fine. Heaven forbid I ended up with any wedge cuts. He would say, what are you trying to do? The door stopping factory here? Here's your fucking margin. He threw me a whole pork middle and said, cut it boneless. Make it a boneless middle. And I did. And that's when I started noticing a change in his demeanor. He was looking intensely and looked at the bones afterwards. There wasn't any words or discouragement. And everything was going fine. I dropped a knife. And I said, oh, do you have a knife dip? Where's your knife dip? Because I was used to working in places with knife dips. I said, knife dip? Oh, please don't tell me you're putting those in your fucking facility. Then he yells at the owner, you're going to have this guy put a knife dip in your facility? That's the worst thing you could do. Thanks. And that was my life for about a month and a half. Once, sometimes twice a week, I'd go to this guy's shop and be berated. The last day, and it got easier. I got less shaky, and I got, like I learned. He brought me into his office right before our farewells, and we passed our inspection at our facility, and the next shipment of pigs were going to be 100% of my control. And he sat me down and he said, "Hey, Travis, you know how to cut. When you first walked in here, you were cocky," which I don't think I was. I walked in there and was wearing a hat in a dumb fashion. That was certainly true. And I had to cut you down. But you'll do good. Don't worry. And I said, thanks, and I shook his hand. Didn't really think it was a life lesson I needed. But it also allowed me to have some great content for this episode. Now, David.
This week at the Meat Block Worldwide International Headquarters, we received an email from a friend of ours that contained a few questions regarding situations that we've all been in before. So we thought that it'd be a good idea to kind of address this on the episode because maybe, we could all benefit from some shared experiences and, knowing that other people go through these situations as well. So it's regarding, biting off more than you can chew, being in over your head. Maybe if you're a football fan, you've outkicked your coverage career-wise. You're in a place that you feel maybe a little bit underqualified for and you're wondering what to do. So here's the question. Hey, y'all. I started my career this past November, 2018, as a butcher's apprentice for a small farm-to-table butcher shop in Texas. I've always dreamed of working in a cut shop, and I'm finally doing it, and I'm loving it. A week and a half ago, I was quote-unquote promoted to head/lead butcher at our facility. I'm in no way comfortable with saying that I'm a head cutter. I feel like I need more experience and possibly a mentor that could meet up with me once in a while and I could learn from him. So my question is there anyone that is in or near this particular area that I could possibly talk with and hopefully continue to learn from? Oh man, I've been in this situation before. Thrust into a position that you're not necessarily ready for, or maybe mentally you're ready, but there's no training program to get you there. There's no precedent set for how to, usher people into new positions. I've definitely been there before, and I think that happens more often than not, especially when people are getting into management roles. There's not a lot of formal training when it comes to management. It's just kind of like watch who did it before you and try to do it that way, I could think of several times where I've landed an awesome job that I wanted, but was maybe from certain angles underexperienced. My first real kitchen job, like actual restaurant kitchen job, I was not ready for that. And I had to learn really quickly on the job. I mean, I didn't even hardly know how to cut an onion. So that was absolutely nerve-wracking. My first supervisory job, where I was working in a large retailer, and just kind of got thrown into the position of being a supervisor with no training whatsoever. It was a disaster. I've told about that experience on the show before. My first fine dining job, like working on the line, working a saute station at a pretty high-end restaurant when I had never really worked saute before. I definitely bit off more than I could chew. The first time I was a short order cook. Oh my God. It was at this diner that served between 500 and 600 covers a day for breakfast, and on the weekend even more for brunch. And I got thrown into the fire of working on the saute line there, and it was a nightmare, and I did not do well. This was a time that I did not do well the first time. First time I got into slaughter management, that was a pretty nerve-wracking situation that I wasn't necessarily ready for, etc. Anyways, you could just go down the line. I'm sure everybody could cherry pick situations that maybe you weren't necessarily ready for. I have a very different approach now to this type of situation, which we'll get to. But what about before? When I've been in these situations before, what has gotten me through? Probably a combination of things. First one is, passion. Obviously, this fella is passionate about his job. And that can take you a really long way. You can do some pretty surprising things when you're feeling passionately and determined about something. Common sense kind of got me through on some of these jobs, just using my own, personal inherent skill set, to navigate through situations and hope to come out okay on the other side. Lots of boxed wine, I think, in my younger years helped a lot. Perfectionism, asking lots of questions, finding someone to admire, to look up to. All these things can help you. Just a quick Google search in your area showed a lot of different kinds of shops there. So what exactly is it do you want to accomplish? Do you want to learn how to kill? Do you want to learn how to break whole animal more efficiently? If either of those are the case, I'd suggest finding a custom exempt cut and wrap that's doing farm kills and mostly red meat, and one that operates on the weekend. So if you're Monday through Friday or whatever your weekend is, find a place that's an operation and get a job, the other 2 days a week. Yeah, you're going to be working 7 days a week for a while. I know that is really tough. But it's a solution. And if you can go through a period, very dedicatedly and passionately and, with hard work and learning on your mind for a short amount of time, it can be a great way to accelerate that process. Having somebody else there to mentor you or to look up to, or even if the gut shop doesn't know that, even if you're just kind of silently, being mentored by the people around you, that can really go a long way. Do you want to learn retail? If you want to learn retail and you're currently in a situation where you don't have that much experience doing retail beef, I'd say find yourself a little grocery store and get in there and cut box meats, because you can put two and two together. If you know how to break into subprimals, maybe some box cutting for a while would be a great way to expand your skill set. Find a little grocery store that'll take you. Do you need to learn about HACCP? Do you need management skills? If you need either of those things, especially in your area in Texas, being very largely populated, without a doubt, you'll be able to find several locations that'll administer HACCP certifications and trainings, whether it's through a local university or some consultants. Inevitably, there's those classes are going on somewhere, so you can find that. And as far as management goes, if you want to learn some management skills, oftentimes local community colleges will have continuing education classes, which will include basic business management. Sometimes you could take a certificate course, and it's night school. So there's a lot of different options. But what I would suggest, if you feel like you're really over your head, is to go back and you could do a SWOT analysis on yourself and be really honest, and then come up with a development plan when you identify what your weaknesses are. And you could go forward from there, When you do the SWOT analysis, you start to identify opportunities based on what your weaknesses and threats are, and you may find a lot of resources in your community where you can hone in the skills that you need, just in part-time. Work a couple jobs for a while, work 3 jobs for a while. I know it's going to be tough, but it's going to be totally worth it in the end, because ultimately, this is college for this particular trade. According to the University of Michigan Flint, you should spend 2 hours studying for every per week for every credit hour. So if you've got 14 credit hours, which I think is a pretty common class load, that's 14 hours a week. And then multiply that by 2 to get your total study hours. That's a total of 42 hours a week. And if you're in school, you're going to have to work at least 16 hours a week to have some spending money. So, you're in the 60 plus hour a week range if you're in school and you're learning something. And here you're learning and you're also getting practical experience and you're getting paid for it. So I say don't be shy about logging a lot of hours right now when you're, early on in your career. And if your body's up for it and your mind's up for it and you've got a good routine to take care of yourself, I say go for it and find a second job or a couple second jobs where you can learn the things that you're looking to learn. I guess really the possibilities are totally endless. It just takes, a little bit of kind of self-reflection and personal inventory, and then you can move from there to know how to best supplement what you have going on. And you can keep that job, and you can confidently know that you're doing your best and using the tools that you have to succeed the best way that you can. Another thing that I wish that somebody would have told me a long time ago was to ask for what you need. Have your boss or your employer set parameters and boundaries and expectations for you so that, being kind of green and needing to work out the kinks in your own personal style in a job is one thing, but being, underprepared, but also kind of stabbing in the dark, because you don't have good expectations set for you or clear boundaries, that makes the job 10 times as hard. So, you can't hit a target that you can't see, no matter how good of a shot you are. So it's important that you have your employers or your directs, superiors, really outline what it is they expect from you. And then you can use the tools that you're gaining more and more all the time, to solve those the best way that you know how. And asking for, not constant feedback, but just, occasional feedback or assuming that unless you hear about it, you're doing just fine. That's how I go about keeping that job and feeling more comfortable and giving yourself the tools that you need. Confidence is really, really key. If you don't have confidence, you can leave yourself susceptible to imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome kind of is this psychological behavior where we believe that we don't deserve the accolades that we get, or that we're not smart enough to be in the position that we're in, or we're just not good enough, and that we're going to be found out as a fraud. Going hand in hand with that is a condition called pluralistic ignorance. And what it is that, we doubt ourselves privately, but we believe we're alone because no one else voices their struggle. So you think you're the only person that feels this way, and that makes you feel like an extra fraud, and that you're going to be found out, and then you're going to lose everything. And it's just a shitstorm of anxiety and fear and doubt, and it feels terrible. Everybody feels like an imposter from time to time. Maybe all the time. It's something that is super common and we all go through. Even Albert Einstein referred to himself as an involuntary swindler, and that he didn't believe he deserved the attention he received. Everybody in the entire world experiences this. So you're definitely not alone if you feel this way sometimes. Oftentimes it'll sit in before an important day, or like your first day on a new job that you're underqualified for, or maybe after you've had a performance review and it sucked, was kind of harsh, and now you feel like you can't do anything and it's totally crippling. It takes a variety of forms. Scientific American says that there's 3 types of behavior that are responsible for this. There's the one thought that's like, I'm a fake, right? I'm a total fraud. People are going to find out and they're going to expose me for what I am. And the second line of thinking that brings about imposter syndrome and pluralistic ignorance is, I just got lucky. Like, I don't deserve this. I'm not this good. I just got lucky. The stars aligned. It was a perfect storm, and here I am, and I don't deserve it. And then the third line of thinking that brings on the imposter syndrome is kind of a little more convoluted, but it's like a false modesty. So it's like you're unable to accept a compliment by acting confident and feigning modesty. Oh, this old thing, it's just kind of a defense mechanism that really hides your true fears and self-doubt. If you're going through this, try to remind yourself, this is a pretty intense fear. At least for me it is when it comes in, and it can really be quite distracting. So it's a good time, when you're collecting yourself and you're able to like just take some time and ground yourself and just kind of think through this particular feeling, of anxiety and doubt. You got to remind yourself of all your accomplishments. Look at where you were 5 years ago, and try to like get into that headspace. I think about myself when I had my very first kitchen job, and I think about, what the path has been like to this moment right now. And it's unbelievable. If you told me 10 years ago that I would be in the place in this room where I'm sitting right now, I tell you were high. There's no way. So having a little gratitude for yourself and a little bit of support can kind of disarm that imposter syndrome a little bit. Be aware that this feeling is super normal. Like we said, everybody feels this. But the mistake that we make or the difficulty that we have is the communicating about it and talking to other people. I bet that if you found people that you trusted around you and explained your fears and feelings of self-doubt, if you're going through this, they'll say that they've experienced the same thing, and maybe they have a story they want to share with you. And when it feels less common, it feels less powerful, I think another thing that really helps with this is if you can find yourself a mentor. You're talking about identifying the things that you feel like you lack, finding someone who can teach you, taking a second job, finding somebody that you can trust and teaches you in a way that you can understand. When you're making progress and you're dedicated to it, you are that thing, the thing that you doubt. Being proactive, at least for me, gives me a huge amount of confidence because I feel like I'm accomplishing something in the direction that I want to go. And sometimes it may not be you learning something from a teacher, but it could be you teaching someone else. Oftentimes, I find teaching other people an opportunity to solidify a method or an order of operations or a particular skill. For whatever reason, when you teach somebody else, it puts your brain kind of on the spot. It makes you remember all of the steps and the minutiae in between. And oftentimes under pressure, at least for me, it works. I recall things that had I sat down and tried to draw a diagram, couldn't have remembered. Another thing I suggest, and I don't mean to get self-deprecating or be really hard on yourself, but it's a good idea to set up a framework where you expect initial failure when you try something. Because in a lot of instances, failure is equally, if not more, valuable than achievement, because you learn what not to do, as long as it's not dangerous. Not all failures are created equal, of course. There's a spectrum, right? There's like blameworthy fails and praiseworthy fails. There's the Harvard Business Review put together a spectrum of different failures, and the blameworthy end of the spectrum is really like negligence, deviation, like you choose to take a method that is not proven or does not work, right? And then there's like the praiseworthy end of failure, where you're experimenting and you're researching and you're trying things out, and it's not right the first time, but you're moving in the correct direction, and that's really what you're looking to do. So, just try it and try again. If you fall off, get back on, and eventually you'll find your groove. And it's always going to be a learning process. And I suggest going for jobs and opportunities that you're a little bit underqualified for, because if you're anything like me, you perform better under pressure. It's like that fourth quarter mentality. It's you have to do well, and it kind of allows you to employ not only your learned skills, but also your instincts, and your reactions. And I think that that's a really important part of putting all of you into a position, is being able to access those parts of you as well. So, expect failure, but embrace it and learn something from it. And I don't know, these are just some suggestions I have for you, my friend, and anybody else out there who finds themselves in over their head. If you need a refresher on a SWOT analysis or an individual development plan or smart planning, we've got a couple episodes over the last, 7 or 8 that contain info about those. And it's a great way to get started.
So I guess the point of my last story, well, thanks, David. First off, that was great. The point is that like I was cocky, and it wasn't the hat. It was just like an inner cockiness, and it was the false modesty. People would be like, "You're so good." I'm like, "Oh no, I'm not." And it took hindsight to realize that was like the first time in a long time in my career where I was met with confrontational feedback, where it was really like, holy shit. First thing in my mind, maybe I'm not that good. I think this guy just found me out. I don't deserve this. I don't need to open up this shop. I don't need to do this. I'm not qualified enough. I'm not blah, 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 blah. I'm not blah, 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 and all this other stuff. It's like, and then in that one instant, that guy planted a seed of doubt that has flourished in me ever since. So thanks. After working in San Diego for a while, moved up to the great state of Washington, where I currently live, the Pacific Northwest, where it's beautiful and there's squatches everywhere. Even though I live on an Indian reservation, the screaming eagle is loud here, boys, and I love it. But looking for work here was actually incredibly easy. But the way I'm trying to segue is that I found myself in a similar situation of opening a cut and wrap facility for someone who already had the slaughter portion of it handled by operating a USDA mobile slaughter unit. But in this unique state, I would take it from the unit and then deliver it to a cut and wrap facility in Bow and cut it with their butchers. And first time I did that, I wore a hat in a more conventional manner. Had my earrings out, all this, made sure everything was good. And prepared, like, oh, all right, this is going to be bad. And it was fine. I cut there for about 2 months, 2 days a week, 1 day a week. And then that they picked up and I had to bring our USDA inspected product to another facility. And that was in Seattle. And we bought this company a saw, and I was told I was going to be cutting in a portion of their shop, but their butchers would be there. And, I'm like, okay, their whole carcass shop. Man, they must have some really great butchers there. I need to, all right, hopefully everything goes smooth and you're not like made a joke of or whatever. I don't know. But I remember there was insecurities and fears of being found out and whatnot. And I even went to the point where I found them online and was looking at the people cutting. And that's the first time I saw Zach. And now Zach works with me. And I was like, okay, I go there. They're butchers. Yeah, they cut meat. It was fine. Didn't need to have unnecessary stress about it. Cut there for a few months, and then things ended up changing and took our product to this place in Burlington where the owner said, all right, we have a couple good cutters, and for you to use this place as a cut and wrap to cut your USDA beef, I want you to train some of our cutters and go over stuff. And I'm like, oh, great. what's worse than dealing with people who have been in this industry and then trying to teach them new things? I was like, okay, how long has one of you guys been cutting? He's like, well, he's, worked at Shanks back in the 80s and then did some custom and prepare myself for a horrible situation. And it wasn't. It was fine. Same thing happened again in Rochester at when I met Tracy and at Heritage Meats. And Tracy actually showed me something, but came at it from an approach of like, if you're open to it, could I show you this? And it was great. And I still talk to him today. And all those places that I mentioned, I ended up working with Zach from one of those places. Ryan currently works at one of those places. That place where I had to train that cutter from the 80s, I'm now that guy's manager, and I manage that shop. And I guess it's that initial meeting that flared up when I met those, or meeting of people that flared up when I met those butchers in Seattle last weekend. Where it's, oh no, people are talking about other stuff and blah, blah, blah. I don't need to be here. I don't know what they're talking about. I am in over my head. I talked to Brian Mayer about it. And he's saying something about false modesty, and it's truly not. Like, don't get me wrong, I get false modest all the fucking time. And I know my strengths, but the imposter syndrome is like a flares up on meeting someone, usually for the first time. Afterwards, I'm fine. 10 minutes in, I'm fine. And when I went down to work and try out and eventually make the American team, imposter syndrome was there too. But once I got to know everyone, I was like, oh, this is great. And now I don't have to worry about it, Yeah. I don't know. I think there's something deeper there. Guess the moral of this episode is don't let one bad thing ruin it. I've had many bad things in my career. But I truly focus on that one moment and that one story and me wearing that hat like I was shredding the nard in California in 1987. Until next time, keep your knife sharp and live in the margin.